I'm Mark Broom. Let's start by taking a look at the day's headlines. A united front in the face of unprecedented trade pressure from Japan. President Moon Jae-in and South Korea's 5 political parties agreed to pull out all the stops to force Tokyo to remove its export curbs on Seoul. Readying for a downpour, torrential rain is forecast to lash South Korea's southern regions over the next several days as a monsoonal front and a typhoon barrel toward the Twin Peninsula. Plus, US President Donald Trump reveals an American warship in the Gulf has downed a hostile Iranian drone after it came within 900 meters of the vessel and didn't heed calls to change course. We start this morning at South Korea's Blue House in a rare display of solidarity. President Moon Jae-in and the leaders of all the country's political parties have demanded Japan immediately remove its export restrictions on Seoul. This call came during a meeting on Thursday at the top office. While they agreed on the need to come out strong against Japan, they failed to see eye to eye on swiftly approving a long-pending extra budget bill that's been in limbo at the National Assembly for months now. And that's despite the fact some of those extra funds would actually be channeled into local firms affected by Tokyo's unprecedented trade measures. Our Shin Se-min has our top story.
United against Japan's export restrictions that aim at undermining the heart of the Korean economy, President Moon Jae-in and the heads of the nation's 5 main political parties agreed to form a pan-national emergency cooperation body on Thursday.
The government and rival political parties have agreed to bipartisanly cooperate in the face of Japan's economic retaliatory measures and run a pan-national emergency cooperative body.
During a rare meeting, the first of its kind in over a year, President Moon Jae-in and the leaders of the parties shared a mutual understanding that Japan's export curbs are an unfair economic measure that goes against free trade principles. Standing in unity, the president and the National Assembly leaders called on Tokyo to immediately withdraw its export control of core materials necessary in the manufacturing of semiconductors and display panels.
Japan should clearly realize that additional measures such as removing Korea from its whitelist of trusted trade partners clearly jeopardizes not only bilateral relations, but also the security and regional cooperation in Northeast Asia.
As for sending an envoy to Japan, President Moon reportedly said such a deployment of a high-level official is possible at any time, but added that doesn't always mean it will be the ultimate solution, and said negotiations should take place first. But despite Moon's call for a swift passage of the multi-billion-dollar extra budget bill still mooring at the parliament, the political leaders were not able to narrow the gap. Still, with the country's political leaders, both the president and the party chiefs not being able to reach bipartisan consensus on the supplementary budget bill, the issue of financial aid to Korean firms as well as the economic malaise of the Korean economy may remain challenges for the time being. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Now, after their discussions with President Moon at the top office on Thursday, rival party leaders returned to the National Assembly to share their thoughts on the rare session. The ruling party said the talks were meaningful and helpful. The opposition, unsurprisingly, was less impressed, saying the meeting should have produced more concrete results. Kim Jong-un reports.
Rival parties generally say that their encounter with President Moon Jae-in is a symbolic act and that they will work together to fulfill the promises made in the meeting. Ruling Democratic Party chief Lee Hae-chan said that the atmosphere of Thursday's talks was calm and promising.
We were able to come up with very meaningful results, such as announcing a joint statement by all 5 parties. I feel very relieved that the political parties came up with an agreement and are working together to counter this economic crisis the nation is facing right now.
Main opposition party chief Hwang Kyo-an, who held talks with President Moon for the first time since he took the post, said that he hopes the talks could be a symbol of hope for a change in the Moon administration's economic and diplomatic policies, and vowed that the main opposition bloc is ready to contribute to such changes. However, he still stressed the necessity for a private session with the president, a request that has been turned down by the Blue House in the past.
In order for a more in-depth practical conversation to take place, I think the president needs to speak one-on-one with the largest opposition party in order to discuss ways to develop the future of the country.
The minor opposition parties also evaluated the talks as a significant step in solving the nation's current challenges. The Bareunmirae party said that although the meeting might not have been satisfactory for all participants, it was a good opportunity to get negotiations started. The Party for Democracy and Peace and the Justice Party also agreed that the meeting was meaningful, but it was not able to solve pending parliamentary issues, such as a supplementary budget bill, as well as electoral and constitutional reform issues. Kim Mo-kyun, Arirang News.
Seoul's National Security Advisor expects Japan to announce around the end of July that it will exclude South Korea from a white list of countries receiving preferential trade treatment, and that Tokyo will cite national security grounds. According to the chair of the minor opposition Party for Democracy and Peace, during Thursday's meeting with party leaders, Chung said Tokyo is in the process of removing South Korea from the list. Should that happen, South Korea will have to receive individual 6-month approvals for more than 850 products it imports from Japan. The leader of the minor opposition Justice Party said Chung mentioned Seoul may have to reconsider renewing the General Security of Military Information Agreement with Japan, signed in 2016, to more effectively respond to North Korea's threats. Seoul wants to stay in that pact, but may change depending on the circumstances. Now, with more and more South Koreans boycotting Japanese products over Tokyo's export curbs, local consumers are now turning their backs increasingly on taking trips to Japan. It has actually reached the point where Japanese media outlets are admitting the sharp decrease in visitors from South Korea is becoming a serious cause of concern. Lee Seung-jae reports.
Looking at the number of people who traveled to Japan in the first half of 2019, the number of Chinese visitors was up more than 11% on year. Contrast that with the number of South Korean visitors dropping 3.8%, the first on-year decline in 5 years. With the trade row raging between Seoul and Tokyo, Japanese media outlets are starting to report that South Koreans who were considering traveling to Japan are now seeking out other vacation spots. They also reported that several travel sites in South Korea have even opted to remove Japan from their travel packages altogether. The Japanese daily Sankei Shimbun says the decrease in the number of South Koreans visiting Japan is inevitable, given the current circumstances. It added it might be hard for Japan to reach its goal of 40 million foreign visitors next year, and that's despite the 2020 Tokyo Olympics being held in its capital. Travel agencies in Japan report that the cancellation of reservations made in South Korea have soared since the start of July. The number of South Korean visitors who travel to Japan this summer is also sharply lower than last summer. The boycott is especially bad news for Japan's tourism industry, as South Koreans made up almost a quarter of the foreign tourists who visited Japan last year. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Now, one of Japan's top businessmen says his $90 billion venture fund is not investing in a single Japanese company because of Japan's weakness in the field of artificial intelligence. That's Son Jung-ui, also known as Masayoshi Son, who is of Korean descent and heads the conglomerate SoftBank. According to Japanese broadcaster NHK, Son said in a lecture in Tokyo that in terms of AI, Japan is underdeveloped. He categorized it as a crisis. SoftBank's Vision Fund, he said, has invested in 75 unicorn firms around the world, but not a single one in its own backyard. Countries in Southeast Asia, on the other hand, have been able to establish AI-related business models successfully. South Korea's producer prices fell in June for the first time in 5 months, mainly because of cheaper oil and farm products. And that could mean lower prices for consumers down the road. According to the Bank of Korea, the producer price index edged down 0.3% in June from the month before. The central bank attributed the fall to a drop in the prices of petroleum and coal products. Korea's benchmark Dubai crude was down by 11%. Richard Baldwin is a world-renowned expert on global trade and economics who currently works for various organizations, including the OECD and the World Bank. He was also an economic advisor to former US President George H.W. Bush. We wanted here at Arirang News to get his take on the big economic issues of the day. And since he's in South Korea for the annual Jeju Forum, our business correspondent, Kim Hae-sung, who's in Jeju, managed to grab a few minutes with him to hear his thoughts on globalization and trade. So let's take a look.
You said future globalization will be totally different. What exactly is globalization 4.0, a term you presented at the Davos Forum and here at Jeju Forum?
Up till now, globalization has mostly been companies taking advantage of price differences in goods. But the really large price differences in the world that exist today is in salaries of professionals and service sector workers. Now, up till now, people couldn't take advantage of those differences because of the high cost of face-to-face. But digital technology is changing that reality and making it possible for people to essentially telecommute internationally. We'll have a big wave of service sector globalization.
Then what about South Korean companies? How can they take advantage of globalization 4.0?
Well, so the big famous South Korean companies are in manufacturing, and that's okay. But probably they'll be able to take advantage of lower cost service provisions doing it. But look, what I'm actually looking at is lots of new companies. So one of my analogies that I like is eBay or Alibaba. These were brand new companies that broke the business model, online retailing. And I'm thinking that will be lots of companies that rise providing services overseas, organizing domestically.
Right, Professor, we talk about globalization 4.0, but ironically, we're seeing a rise in protectionism across the world in recent years with the US-China trade war and the trade spat between South Korea and Japan. What's your assessment of this risk?
Well, that is very serious. I mean, I think the major dominant thing right now is the US has more or less declared trade war on everybody. The US, Canada, Mexico, EU, Japan, Korea, Australia, everybody. India now, recently. And people are starting to protect back. So that's somewhat disruptive. But on the other hand, many of these countries are starting to liberalize trade among themselves. And more deeply, I think that our economies are so deeply knit that we'll find a way to make it work.
With regards to the South Korea-Japan trade spat, what's your advice on what the South Korean government can do to resolve this trade?
Again, you diversify your markets, you diversify your sources. That's a little too late now. And I think the legal recourse to the WTO is the obvious thing to do. But of course, many of these things involve diplomacy deep down. I think maybe in a different world, the US would have stepped in to prevent them from fighting. But this current administration is not in the mood for that kind of restraint. The problems that are coming now go way beyond economics. And there I can just, as an optimist and a global citizen, hope that it works out.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Professor.
My pleasure.
And that was our Kim Hae-sung speaking with Professor Richard Baldwin on the sidelines of the Jeju Forum. Now, US President Donald Trump has vowed to bring up the issue of religious persecution in North Korea to the regime's leader, Kim Jong-un. Meeting with victims of religious persecution at the White House on Wednesday local time, Trump told North Korean defector Ju Il-yong that he understood what Ju was saying about religious persecution in the North. Speaking at a State Department conference on religious freedom on Thursday, Vice President Mike Pence said as Trump pursues denuclearization and peace, the US will stand for the freedom of religion of all people, of all faiths on the Korean Peninsula. Now to yet another disturbing chapter in the tensions simmering between the US and Iran. US President Donald Trump has announced an incident in the Strait of Hormuz in which a US naval vessel destroyed an Iranian drone that was closing in on the warship in question. It got very close indeed. For more on this and other news from around the world, let's turn to our Hong Yu. So tell us more about how this incident actually unfolded.
Well, Mark, the Iranian drone was destroyed because, according to President Trump, it was threatening the safety of the ship and the ship's crew. The U.S. Navy amphibious assault ship USS Boxer took defense action against the drone when it kept getting closer despite multiple calls to stand down. The U.S. Navy perceived the move as a threat to the safety of the ship and the ship's crew and immediately destroyed the drone, which was unmanned, using electronic jamming. Trump called it the latest of many provocative and hostile actions by Iran against vessels operating in international waters. Also on Thursday, Iran said its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had seized a foreign oil tanker on Sunday that it claimed was carrying on million liters of smuggled fuel and 12 crew. A footage showing two smaller vessels maneuvering around a United Arab Emirates-based ship was released by Iranian state media on the same day. An animation studio in the Japanese city of Kyoto was set on fire on Thursday, killing 33 people and injuring 36. Police suspect it was an arson attack by a 41-year-old man who was seen pouring gasoline over the entrance to the first floor of the Kyoto Animation Studio. The suspect was carrying gasoline cans, kitchen knives, and a hammer. According to witnesses, he screamed, "You die," before igniting the gasoline. The suspect is currently in hospital with serious burns. 74 people were inside the studio at the time of the blaze, which was only extinguished by the authorities after 5 hours. To celebrate the approaching 50th anniversary of the historic Apollo 11 moon landing, NASA has released a YouTube video showing scientists checking samples brought from the moon for any sign of life. It's the first time such footage has been released. In a statement explaining the video, a biologist said they had to be careful to avoid contaminating the samples, such as lunar rocks, soil, and dust, so they had to sterilize every tool used in the process. After several months of testing, the research ended with no life found.
Time now for our Life and Info segment, where we focus on information that should be useful for your everyday life, especially if you're in Korea today. That's because we're going to focus on how women who have migrated to South Korea can receive support in their native languages, especially in emergency situations. And this has been a red-hot topic after video of a Korean man abusing his Vietnamese wife went viral online and caused a lot of controversy with it. I'm pleased to say we have our Oh Soo-young in the studio, and she's been covering this very important issue all week for us here on Arirang News. Your reports have been fantastic, Soo-young. So if a foreign woman in Korea is facing abuse or violence at home, it may be difficult for them to call the authorities, the police, right away, especially if they aren't that fluent in Korean. Can you just walk us through the first steps that if a woman finds herself in this situation, they should try and follow?
Well, the first thing she could do is phone the Tanuri helpline. That's 1577-1336 for migrant women in Korea. It's a 24-hour hotline. It's open all around the year. It's for migrant women and it offers help in 13 different languages, including English, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Thai, and Russian. And the call center will help you take the case to the police with an interpreter and even connect you to an emergency shelter if you find yourself in a particularly dire situation. So if you are a foreign woman in Korea and you've been abused, violated or threatened in any way and not just by your partner, please phone the police or Tanuri helpline if you're not fluent in Korean. Again, the number is 1577-1336.
Yes, and if you suspect someone you know might be subject to domestic violence at home as well, perhaps you could either urge them to call that number or call that number on behalf of that person. Now, we must stress that it takes a lot of courage for a woman who might be in a very controlling relationship, someone who is violent towards her, to report to the authorities what's going on, even if you're in your home country. And if you throw into the mix that you're in a foreign country, perhaps you don't speak the language that well, and you don't have that much of a social circle, really, to rely on.
Right, you're definitely right. It's so hard to walk away from an abusive relationship. And actually in Korea, there are about 28 emergency shelters and facilities nationwide that take in these migrant women as well as their children. And they offer protection for these women and their kids. They offer protection and support for up to 2 years, depending on their circumstances. And in order to help them recover both physically and emotionally, therapy, counselling and medical care is available at these shelters and also through local organisations. To help women start rebuilding their lives, local organisations, they offer interpretation, information about job opportunities, job training, as well as legal advice.
We aim to help migrant women settle in Korea and learn about their human rights. We do this by providing information about Korea, legal information, and so on. We hope they will also help other migrant women.
Okay, that's a fantastic service that we have here in Korea. Hopefully they can add more support centres throughout the years. There's 28 now, but hopefully we can get to more in the future. So the main point really is to not only help these women through an extremely difficult situation at home, but also helping them integrate more into Korean society so they can make friends, have this support group around them as well.
Yes, that's exactly right. The aim really is to help them integrate into Korean society, and that goes for all migrant women, not just victims of domestic violence.
Right.
So for those who would like to be more socially active, learn Korean and even develop friendships, you can join communities like Tamil, which is run by a Mongolian woman who was actually Korea's first ever politician of foreign descent.
It's crucial for migrant women to leave their homes, socialize, and find sources of income. We get together to learn the Korean language together, organize cultural activities to share our diverse cultures with Koreans, and these days we're focusing on diverse job opportunities.
And local governments like these are working with local communities, and they're trying to help women develop quality skill sets for quality jobs instead of, menial labor.
While most migrant women in Korea tend to take on a simple work like cleaning or working at restaurants, Seongnam City is offering training in medical tourism so they can turn their native language skills into a specialized profession in interpretation. We think their language skills and the city's growing industries can create a great synergy effect.
We're learning about the medical tourism industry and special terminologies, then we'll start practical training. It's a great career opportunity to help people from our countries who visit Korea for medical treatment.
Okay, very good. So perhaps setting them on the path to a really good career, because that's another factor that leads women to stay in these abusive relationships, the fact they don't have financial freedom to break away from it. So if they can learn these skills, perhaps they can have a fresh start at life, which we hope they all can have. Just before we go, just give us another reminder of how we can connect to this hotline, or if you need any legal advice or whatnot.
Right, well, once again, if you need general information about life in Korea or legal advice, or you're going through domestic violence, then call Danuri Helpline at 1577-1366. That's 1577-1366.
Well, thank you very much for your report today, Soo-young, and your series of reports all the way through the week. Very important information. We appreciate it.
Right, thank you for having me.
Good morning. Heavy monsoon showers are already falling in the southern coastal regions in Jeju due to the combination of monsoonal front and the approaching tropical storm Danas. Now, Danas will move in a north-northeasterly direction across the East China Sea and into the East Sea over the weekend, and in the southeastern coastal city of Yeosu and Pohang and their surrounding regions are expected to feel the direct effects for the next couple of days, so please be extra careful. Heavy rain alerts have been issued in southern coastal regions, and warnings are in place for Jeju and Busan. And the weather agency will issue a typhoon advisory shortly for land and sea in the southern and eastern parts of the peninsula. The sheer amount of rain is a concern. A water bomb of nearly 500 millimeters of rain or even more is possible in southeastern regions through early Sunday morning. And today's highs will be slightly higher, and readings will be nearing 35 degrees Celsius for upper regions, with Seoul and nearby areas under a heat wave advisory. That's Korea for you, and here's the international weather for viewers around the world.
Well, that's all we have for now, news and weather-wise, on this Friday morning here in Seoul. Stay tuned to Arirang TV. And a reminder that our next newscast is coming up at noon Korea time with our very own Lee Ji-yoon. But if we don't see you, have a wonderful weekend. Until next time, goodbye.
What can this door be? An unexpected encounter turning into joyful communication. An unfamiliar smile turning into a warm welcome. We wait for the day we'll happily reconfirm our similarities. Knocking on the door of an era of peace and communication.
SmartBiz Accelerators introduces the innovative manufacturing sites of the domestic small and mid-sized companies. This week on SmartBiz Accelerators, we look into Oyoung, a firm specializing in dye technology of various colors, J&S Corporation, a company that's rapidly advancing to become an expert in the auto parts industry, and Reco, which leads in the eco-friendly packaging technology in Korea. Don't forget to tune in and stay with us.